I'm starting to realize now that maybe designing an entire planet while also having terrible artistic abilities and an extreme lack of focus maybe wasn't the smartest idea. But I did it anyway. I had basically given up on, well, this, but then I rewatched Alien Biospheres, which is great if you haven't seen it somehow. Uh, I'd highly recommend putting the roughly 8.5 hours into watching the series so far. And I watched Alien Biospheres, and, well, I'm back. So, welcome, friends, to Samsara 3. Again. Howdy. Samsara 3, for those that don't know, is a planet of sorts, and by of sorts I mean it is literally just a planet. I don't know why I put of sorts there, but I did. It, like Earth, is and has been home to a fascinating diversity of life throughout the ages, but unlike Earth, it's developed life independently multiple times. Once before, in fact. Eons ago, many hundreds of millions of years, perhaps billions, life thrived in a tropical, radioactive hellscape, an environment so seemingly unfit for life, yet life managed nonetheless. That all ended when a high-energy gamma-ray burst, a concentrated beam of intense radiation, collided with the planet, creating a nuclear chain reaction on a scale so vast that we could not recreate it using every single nuclear weapon we have on our planet. The sheer force of the unholy atomic detonation knocked the planet out of orbit, careening into empty space, seemingly for the rest of eternity. That is not what happened, however. Our esteemed traveler of the void managed to get gravitationally trapped by a small star, only slowing down enough to reach a stable-ish orbit by smashing into a smaller planetoid, a body that is now this planet's moon. This celestial immigrant remained dormant for many millions of years until one freak event occurred. A small chemical reaction deep underneath the surface of its now frozen oceans. Near a deep hydrothermal vent, just the right amount of organic molecules received just the right amount of energy and started to make more of themselves. A cold, dead world. Still cold, but not quite as dead. Life does as life does, and diversifies. We will start roughly 600 million years before the present day, in a period of time Samsaran paleontologists call the Protogene, in reference to it being the first period of time where there are complex multicellular organisms, not unlike Earth's Cambrian. You may be thinking to yourself, Connor, if there was a life a long time ago even before this, and we know about it, how is this the first era, in air quotes? To which I say, shut up. If you want to go back and watch the old videos, I would recommend not. They were bad. Anyways, the Protogene is a relatively stable section of this planet's deep history, with it gradually warming and the ice caps melting by the time the period ends, 60 million years after it begins. This period is defined by previously unprecedented levels of biodiversity, a rate of adaptive radiation that has never happened before, and strangely enough, two almost completely separate biota, or the array of organisms in a specific area. This early example of allopatry can be explained fairly simply. The ice sheets. The complex organisms that call this chronological region home developed on the equatorial coasts, and none are yet well developed enough to brave the subglacial coastal waters to the north or south, or cross the roughly 9,000 kilometers of open ocean needed to get to the other side. It could be possible to walk along the seafloor, but that would require the organism to maintain energy the whole way, and if the seafloor is largely uncolonized, that's just not feasible. So, until long-distance swimmers evolve and or the glaciers retreat enough to allow coastal species to slowly make their way across, the ecologies of the East and West will be largely separate. Today, I'm covering just the first half of the Protogene period. We're going chronologically here, with every episode being roughly a half or a third of a period, so it doesn't get all confusing. Looking at you, Biblaridian. Now, for the moment you've all been waiting for, I present to you the speculative organisms of Samsara 3. The basis for any food web are the producers, and in the early oceans, this is largely just plankton, phytoplankton, typically. Though Samsara 3 has a little quirk. Its atmosphere is around 1% hydrogen chloride, which would allow for some microbes to synthesize that for energy as well. However, hydrogen chloride dissolves in water, making hydrochloric acid, which of course would prohibit any organisms, micro or macro, from sticking around for too long. These phytoplankton and chemoplankton, as some call them, will in turn be fed upon by zooplankton, small animals. Zooplankton will also be quite abundant due to the metaphorical smorgasbord of food for them. Eventually, these zooplankton may get large enough to be able to move on their own against the current, allowing for a whole new level of adaptive radiation. On Earth, some of the first major contributors to animal biomass were large groups of sessile filter feeders, and it may be the same on Samsara 3. Asexual reproduction is much simpler than sexual reproduction and is likely to be the original of the two. An early clade of complex life on Samsara 3 is Stomazoa, a group of fairly small filter feeders, not dissimilar to Earth barnacles, except without a protective shell. There's no need to be large, however, as there's not yet anything large enough to prey on them. They are, in essence, a meaty bowl with an opening at the bottom leading to the stomach. Food, particularly marine snow, falls down into it and gets vacuumed into the digestive system to be broken down. Let's say the ancestral stomazoans reproduce via budding, where small growths on the parent eventually split off and become their own organism. These colonial stomazoans will quickly cover the seafloor, and the ocean currents will help their budded offspring spread to new areas. This is an example of primary ecological succession, a scenario in which an organism colonizes a previously uninhabited area. This may result in vast mats of a living tissue carpeting the bottom of the ocean, allowing for more specialized forms to move in. Speaking of more specialized forms, not long after the emergence of the colonial stomazoans, a more derived clade will develop. Competition is likely to be high in these areas, which will drive natural selection. Specifically, it's a lot harder to get food when all of your neighbors are taking it before you can. This may bring about the emergence of taller stomazoans, and perhaps even ones that can actively find food. Perhaps this comes in the form of a long, forked, for lack of a better word, tongue, with muscular tendrils not unlike those of sea lilies. These tendrils will be covered in setae, allowing them to better hold on to plankton that float into them, in which case the tongue can be retracted into the body for digestion. These taller stomazoans, which we'll call trisulcostomes, are better adapted for reaching large sizes, so may outcompete the larger ancestral stomazoans. However, there may be enough niche partitioning so that the smaller forms stay alive. These two clades may together form massive reefs, wherever plankton occur in appreciable numbers. Larger species may exist further from the coast, partially relying on marine snow to sustain their larger body sizes. And now that the basis of the food web is essentially complete, higher trophic levels will start to fill. Early after the evolution of the trisulcostomes, a strange and new form will develop. A clade of unknown origin, their worm-like form is seemingly well adapted for maneuvering through tight spaces, such as the stands of stomazoans themselves. They have a simple but muscular mouth at the front of their body, a distinct head, 12 fins, and 8 simple eyes. The clade Dodecapoda are obviously quite different from their distant sessile relatives. They are better equipped for feeding higher up in the water column than even the trisulcostomes, which may grant them a bit of freedom from the highly competitive seafloor. They swim via lateral movements of their 12 simple fins, which, while metabolically inefficient and quite slow, is still more than enough to maintain their short-lived aquatic supremacy. Their motility and complex senses make it quite easy to find and catch the plankton the early forms feed on. Basic gills at the base of the head allow for water and therefore oxygen to pass through as long as it is moving. And due to the filter-feeding nature of the group, this allows for nearly limitless movement as long as there's food to be eaten. They are, however, quite defenseless, which may prompt an adaptation. If an individual basal dodecapod grows large enough, it may come to prey upon other dodecapods, which are much more nutrient-dense than the plankton that the ancestral forms eat. Over the generations, these predatory dodecapods may adapt for more efficient hunting. Initially, the changes will be small and simple: a more muscular mouth, more degrees of freedom in the fins, etc. Eventually, this may culminate in a strange yet somewhat familiar form. A mouth surrounded by two tentacles helps with prey restraint, though increases drag, so the tentacles will have adapted to be as hydrodynamic as necessary. The fins may broaden and become more horizontal, which helps them displace water more when moving, as well as increasing hydrodynamic efficiency. Eventually, some species may develop an especially unprecedented adaptation. Initially, all dodecapods move via median paired fin swimming, where thrust is provided by back and forth movements of the fins. One group of macropredatory dodecapods may change this, instead keeping the fins relatively still, and instead swimming via up and down movements of the entire body, minus the head. This is sort of like how sea snakes or eels swim, though flipped roughly 90 degrees. This allows for greater speeds than their predecessors, though it comes at the cost of maneuverability. In the open ocean, however, it's not that big of an issue. This form of swimming, called anguilliform locomotion, essentially turns the whole animal into one large fin, which gives these animals, which we'll call flagellanaths, a leg up in the increasingly competitive environments of the Protogene oceans. This clade will quickly diversify, adapting to fill many open predatory niches, some adapting for filter feeding, some specializing for hunting smaller prey, some being reef specialists, swimming low to the ground, and perhaps even feeding upon the stomazoans and trosulcostomes, and some may become the planet's first true hypercarnivores, adapting to hunt other flagellanaths. This early offshoot of the ancestral dodecapod will quickly overwhelm the oceanic ecosystems, forcing their basal cousins to adapt for more specialized lifestyles. On Earth, swimming animals have evolved to not swim several times, and this may happen among a batch of basal dodecapods. Predation near the surface from the recently evolved flagellanaths may coax some species to live, feed, and reproduce near the seafloor, traversing the stomazone reefs to avoid danger. This may result in bodies growing larger and more serpentine, and the fins broadening to better support the animal's weight. This new lifestyle will also entail behavioral changes, as feeding on plankton is no longer feasible if the animal cannot move to where the plankton is. Let's say a clade of these new dodecapods, which we'll call pavemapods, sift through the sand to find detritus that's fallen from higher up, marine snow, rotting animals, etc. This change in diet will require an adaptation in the digestive system, as too much undigested substrate in the stomach could be harmful to the organism. Who would have guessed? However, the pavemapods may take an easier route to food filtration than increasing the potency of their stomach acid. Recall that all dodecapods inherit a muscular mouth from their ancestors, and perhaps this clade uses that to their advantage. In situations where they take in something too big to swallow, mouth muscles could be used to help dislodge the object to prevent, starving to death. As the clade reaches larger sizes and starts spreading to other areas, it may incentivize more and more muscular mouthparts, which may inevitably result in the ability to force water, and in turn anything else inside of the mouth, out in a form of spit. This ability to intentionally spit may have long-term side effects later on, but at this point it is nothing but a boon. Adaptations for generalism and bulk feeding may allow the pavemapods to, metaphorically, pave the way for new life to come on Samsara 3. Next episode. I'm all tuckered out for today, but I'm excited for things to come. The link to the official Discord server is in the description. I'd love to have you there, and I hope y'all are just as excited for the revival of the one and only Samsara 3 project as I am. And by that I mean marginally happy, but otherwise dreading the amount of time and effort I'll have to put in. I had fun making all this stuff for this video, however, and I hope I will in the future. By the next time you see me, we'll have progressed into the latter half of the Protogene period, and let me tell ya, some weird shit is about to go down. Mark your calendars, friends. Goodbye.